Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we are going to be going over what I would look for in a build if I'm going to be looking for a build for Last Epoch. So, sadly, due to the popularity of Last Epoch, there's definitely what I would call bait out there, as there's plenty of people trying to hop on the bandwagon without not necessarily understanding what's going on in the land of Atera. So, we're going to be going over some of the signs and things that you should be looking for in a build. If you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that is the best way of getting this video out to be seen by other people to help them out as well. Alright, so the first thing that you are going to be looking for in a build guide video is gameplay. Gameplay is the most important thing. If you cannot find gameplay, if there's no gameplay, I would immediately discard the build as it's not worth your time. So once you find this gameplay, you're going to be looking at the bottom right. This is the most important thing. If the person has modifiers turned off, I would also immediately discard the guide, as having modifiers on the screen is very important for judging gameplay and the quality of the build, right? So we're going to be looking at this. So there are a few states that this can be in. We're going to talk about those states. The first thing is you are in a dungeon. So if you see like enemies drop more exalted amulets or something like that, I would be very careful. I would look for the line substantially more. That means that they are in a tier 4 dungeon. So, like for instance, enemies drop substantially more exalted amulets or something like that. That means that they're in a tier 4 dungeon, and that means it's a tier 4 Jurla. So that is gameplay that's fine. Now, if you just see enemies drop more amulets, that means that they're in like a tier 3 or tier 2 or tier 1 Jurla, which is definitely not worth your time. And at that point, I would just discard the video. But if it says substantially more, then it's fine. Now, there's two other dungeons. There's the Lightless Arbor and the Soulfire Bastion. But if that's the case, then I would just look for different gameplay, as it's very hard to determine what kind of tier those two are in. Now, the next part of the gameplay is there's going to be normal monoliths. So if you look at the side of the bar and there is not a modifier that says enemies deal more health and damage. So like for instance, it would say enemies deal 60% more health and damage. If that line is not there, that means that they're in normal monoliths. So for the PoE people watching this video, that is the equivalent of showcasing a build in the campaign. All the way up to empowered monoliths is essentially tutorial. Once you get to empowered monoliths, that's when the real game begins, and before that is the tutorial. That's like trying to make a build guide in Act 9. Like, hey, look, my build can do Blood Aqueduct. So if you are seeing gameplay in normal monoliths, or they just have the modifiers turned off by like pressing the little, minus button here, I would immediately discard the video, as it is not worth your time. Being in empowered monos is the first step to making a good build, as that's when you get access to all of the blessings, and it means that they have not spent that much time on the build, and they probably spent more time on the video and the editing of said video than the actual build, which sadly happens a lot. Now, the next step is to look at the modifiers again. You're going to see a modifier that says enemies deal number more and more damage and have more health, right? That's very important to look for, as there's a huge difference between base empowered content, which is empowered monoliths, once you get to the last 390 zones and unlock level 100 monos, and deep corruption. There is a huge difference. So normal empowered monos starts at 60% more health and damage. This is the equivalent of white maps. So keep that in mind when you see this video. That is essentially white maps from Path of Exile. That is the beginning of said content. If you play Diablo 4, that's like showcasing like, I don't know, like level 70 content. That's like when the end game actually begins. And if someone is showcasing build footage or anything on a finished build guide, on a build guide that are like, oh my god, this build is amazing, and it shows 60% more health and damage, I would be very skeptical of the video, as it seems like as though they haven't even gone through the process of farming their own blessings, which is the first thing that you do for every single character. So that's the first step, right? So look for the number. Now, the next step is deep corruption. So if you see that enemies deal more health and damage, as you push corruption in the monolith, which is the current in-game system, enemies will start dealing more damage and start having more health. Usually around now, after a few weeks into the new corruption system, which was just reworked, uh, around now, I would say good content is like Enemies deal like 400 to 500% more health and damage, and even more than that. And then like enemies deal 700% more health and damage. The higher this number, the better. If they're actually doing a high number, then that's great, right? Doing a high number means that you're in high corruption. That means you actually played the build for more than 5 minutes. And that means that the person probably knows what they're talking about, or they're playing something busted and bugged, which we're going to get into right now. So for this section, I actually went in game. We're going to be talking about it a little bit. So you need to make sure that the build that you're looking at does not have any bugs that are assisting it in significant ways. So like for instance, right now, there's a huge bug with Warlock that is causing it to gain insane amounts of ward. I would probably immediately discard that. There's also a bug. There used to be a bug that would allow you to have infinite smoke bombs. I would also discard that. But if a build creator is worth their salt, they will make sure to bug test their own build and figure out what is bugged about it, what is not bugged about it currently. So if we look in our passive tree here, right, to give you a insane example, I am right now playing a Vessel of Strife build. I'm utilizing health regen that are applying to ward. That's where all of my ward is coming from. So if we look at my health regen here, I have 1100. Now, there's currently a bug with Rune Master currently. If you go over to this note here, Sanguine Runestones, the threshold here that says health regen also applies to ward at 15%. So 15% of my health regen would apply to my ward. So if we go look at my number again, that would mean about like, I would gain like, let's say, I don't know, like maybe like 200 ward per second or something like that. But watch my ward count. So we see here we're at 7k ward. If I put in the nodes in here to get the threshold, as you can see, my ward jumps up immediately. That is because right now, as it currently stands, Sanguine Runestones is giving me 150% of my health regen as ward, which is absolutely insane bananas. So for reference, currently my health regen here on Vessel of Strife, it gives me 63% of my health regen as ward, and this is what is commonly referred to as an endgame item. So if you see someone playing with a Vessel and you see that their ward is absolutely insane, it's probably because they're abusing Sanguine Runestones. So I would check the build, make sure there aren't any bugs that are making the build better for no reason. Like for instance, like I said, there's like for instance, squirrels used to give you like, I think like double damage before this patch, and like there's a lot of bugs in last Epoch, so I would be very, very careful in choosing a build and make sure that the person, if they are using a bug, they talk about the bug and they talk about how the build would function without the bug. That is very important, talking about bugs. All right, the next little tip is you need to look at the person's gear. So there's a few important things when it comes to this. Right now, as it currently stands, Last Epoch has 2 cycles. There is the Legacy cycle, which is characters from 9.0 and onwards until now, and then there's new characters made for this patch. So I'm not saying that you should not pay attention to builds that are made in Legacy, but I would say to be very wary of builds in Legacy if they're made in Legacy League. Sadly, there's no way of being able to tell this, by the way, other than looking at their profile. So I would look for their profile link. Like if you want to find their profile, I would heavily suggest looking at their name here. You can actually look this up on a few websites and be able to look for their profile and stuff like that. But essentially, be very wary of whether or not they're in cycle or not. As cycle content, there's a lot of ridiculous, busted, broken gear in Legacy because of the fact it's Legacy, right? If you're from Path of Exile, you know how ridiculous standard is, and a standard build guide is completely different from like, let's say, like a new League build guide. This will get worse and worse and worse as the game goes on, and more characters get thrown into standard, right? And things get removed, changed, and all that. So I would heavily suggest checking on whether or not the character is in cycle or not, as that is very important. I would ask, hey, is this build in cycle or not? Is this in legacy, etc.? That's the question I would ask yourself. Now, another thing that is important here is whether or not the character is offline. Like I said, I'm not saying that you shouldn't watch or watch content that is made for offline gameplay. Like for instance, if you look down here and the lower right of the screen, you will see a ping bar. That ping bar determines whether or not the person is online. If you do not see this ping bar, that means that they're currently playing offline. If you see the ping bar, that means that they're playing online. That's the biggest distinction between playing online and offline. Currently, sadly, right now, as it currently stands, Last Epoch is very easily editable offline. You can do a lot of shenaniganry offline, and this has caused a lot of problems over the course of the game's history. So paying attention to whether or not the character is actually online or not is important. Now, like I said, I'm not saying that there's a witch hunt for people who play offline. I'm not saying there's a witch hunt for people who play Legacy. All I am saying is you need to keep these things in your head when you're looking for a build, because the person might literally be trying to debate you because they might be playing offline and they might be playing with ridiculous gear with like 4 LP Ravenous Voids and stuff without your knowledge. You need to pay attention to that. Also, as well, they could be playing Legacy and playing with ridiculous items that they've garnered over months and months of gameplay instead of like a week of gameplay, right? So you do need to pay attention to that. Sadly, that is very important because you can very easily get debated by that. So that's another thing that's very like important. All right, that's going to be my tips and tricks for trying to find a build in Last Epoch. I know it's a lot of information to handle, but these are the kind of things that you should probably be thinking about when you're looking for build guide videos on the internet. As sadly, there are people that will try to take advantage of you. Now, with all that being said, this has been Dread. I'll have to go do something else. Bye.